Welcome to Echoes of the Midnight, a channel where every whisper hides a haunting truth. Sit back, turn off the lights, and let the midnight tales pull you into their chilling embrace. The question is, can you make it to the end?
Stillhaven seemed like the perfect Christmas escape. Nestled in the snowy mountains, it was the kind of place you'd see on a holiday card. Snow-dusted rooftops, warm lights glowing in every window, and a towering Christmas tree in the town square adorned with golden stars. Chris, Emma, and their 6-year-old daughter Lily had driven hours to reach this remote town, excited for a cozy holiday away from the chaos of city life. As they arrived, the town looked magical. Children laughed while sledding, shopkeepers waved cheerfully, and festive lights twinkled everywhere. Yet, as the family unloaded their luggage, Chris began to notice small oddities. Heavy curtains covered every window. Doors had thick padding around the edges, and chimneys seemed unusually reinforced. Most unsettling of all was the nervous energy among the townsfolk. The innkeeper, Martha, greeted them warmly as they checked into their room, a charming space with a crackling fireplace. But even her smile seemed to falter as the sun dipped lower behind the mountains. "Christmas here is special," Martha said, as she served them steaming mugs of cider. Then her tone darkened. "But listen carefully. After sunset, silence is the rule. Not a sound, not a whisper. It's how we survive."
Chris chuckled, assuming it was a quirky local tradition. "Silent night, huh? That's serious dedication," he joked. But Emma noticed the way Martha's hands trembled as she placed the mugs on the table. "Survive what?" she asked cautiously. Martha hesitated, glancing nervously at the window. "Just trust me. Keep quiet." Without another word, she hurried out, leaving the family uneasy.
At night, after tucking Lily into bed, Chris and Emma sat by the fire, trying to shake the ominous feeling. "I'm telling you," Chris said, "it's probably some old superstition, like scaring kids into behaving." Emma frowned, staring at the frost creeping across the window pane. "It's more than that." Martha was scared, really scared. Before Chris could respond, they heard it. A faint, unnatural hum drifting through the streets. It wasn't the wind. It was steady, almost melodic, but warped and hollow, like a sound from another world. Chris walked to the window. "Probably just wind howling through the mountains," he said, trying to dismiss it. But Emma joined him, her breath fogging the glass as she peered into the darkness. The sound grew louder for a moment, then faded into an oppressive silence. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, but outside, the town was disturbingly still. Neither of them spoke again as they pulled the curtains tighter and sat close together, their unease growing heavier with every passing minute. The next morning dawned bright and serene, and for a while the unease from the previous night seemed like a distant memory. Snow blanketed the streets of Stillhaven, and the family spent the day exploring the town. Quaint shops lined the cobblestone streets, offering handmade ornaments, candles, and baked goods. Lily, clutching a hot chocolate, skipped between her parents, her giggles filling the crisp air. But there was an undercurrent of tension that even the cheerful decorations couldn't mask. Every shopkeeper, every passerby, repeated the same warning before they parted. "Be silent after sunset." The words came with polite smiles, but their eyes betrayed fear. Emma felt it more keenly than Chris. "Do you think they're all in on some elaborate joke?" Chris said as they headed back to the inn. Emma shook her head. "They're scared of something, and after last night, I'm not taking chances." Lily, blissfully unaware of the tension between her parents, played in the corner with her favorite snow globe. She twisted it in her small hands, watching the glitter swirl inside. "Daddy, look, it's snowing in the globe too," she said with a giggle. Chris smiled, but before he could respond, it happened. Daddy grabbed the kids from their parents. Lily's grip slipped, and the snow globe tumbled to the floor. The sound of shattering glass rang out, sharp and unforgiving, breaking the fragile silence like a gunshot. Chris froze mid-step, his heart pounding. Emma spun around, rushing to Lily's side, clamping a hand over her mouth to silence her startled cry. The room fell into an unbearable stillness, the echoes of the broken glass seeming to linger unnaturally long. Then came the hum. At first it was faint, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder, deeper, resonating like a dissonant melody. The air in the room grew cold, frost creeping across the edges of the window pane. Shadows on the walls stretched unnaturally, twisting and bending, as though something unseen moved just beyond the curtains. And then they saw it. The silent watcher floated past the window, draped in tattered robes that moved as if caught in an invisible storm. Its presence was both terrifying and mesmerizing. Its hollow eyes glowed faintly, casting dim light that flickered like dying embers. Chris instinctively held his breath, his pulse hammering in his ears. Emma, trembling, clutched Lily tightly, her hand still pressed over the child's mouth. The watcher paused outside the window, its empty gaze scanning the room as if searching for the source of the noise. Time seemed to stretch unbearably. Chris felt the urge to step back, but he knew even the faintest creak of the floorboards could be fatal. His chest burned as he struggled to hold his breath, the cold biting through his skin. The watcher lingered for a moment longer, its robes billowing despite the still air. Then, without warning, it moved on, gliding soundlessly down the street. The hum faded with it, leaving a suffocating silence in its wake. Emma collapsed back onto the couch, pulling Lily into her arms. Chris exhaled shakily, his legs threatening to give out beneath him. They didn't dare speak, their breaths shallow and quiet. For now, the watcher was gone, but they both knew it wouldn't take much to draw it back. Terrified and desperate for answers, Chris and Emma found Martha in the inn's kitchen early the next morning. She was tending to a pot of steaming broth, but her movements were hurried, her hands trembling. Emma wasted no time. "We need to know what's going on," she said, her voice low but firm. What is that thing? Why is everyone so scared to make a sound? Martha hesitated, her spoon clattering against the edge of the pot. She didn't meet their eyes, instead staring out the frost-covered window. "You should leave this town," she muttered. "The longer you stay, the more danger you're in." "Leave?" Chris snapped. "Are you serious? That thing almost came into our room last night." Emma placed a calming hand on his arm, but leaned closer to Martha. "Please, we need to understand. Our daughter is here. We can't protect her if we don't know what we're dealing with." Martha sighed heavily, finally sitting at the table. She looked older now, as though the weight of what she was about to say aged her in an instant. "It started 100 years ago," she began, her voice beginning to trail off as she silently answered questions. "There was a caroler who traveled from town to town, spreading Christmas cheer. Her voice was like nothing anyone had ever heard. Hauntingly beautiful, they said. But when she came to Stillhaven, the townsfolk didn't welcome her. They mocked her songs, called them strange and eerie. They said her voice didn't belong in a place like this." Martha's gaze drifted to the snow swirling outside. They drove her out into the cold night. She begged them to let her stay, but they wouldn't listen. She wandered into the mountains, her songs growing fainter as the snow buried her voice. The next morning, they found her, frozen outside the town gates. Her lips were blue, but her eyes, they said her eyes were open, staring straight at the village. Chris shifted uneasily in his chair. "And the curse?" said Helen. Martha nodded. "Before she died, she cursed us. Every Christmas Eve, her spirit returns to Stillhaven as the silent watcher. It's drawn to sound, to voices, as if searching for the ones who mocked her. Those it finds." Martha hesitated, swallowing hard. "They're never seen again." A chill settled over the room, heavier than the frost outside. Emma's mind raced, the image of the glowing-eyed figure from the previous night still fresh in her memory. "Is there a way to stop it?" she asked. Martha hesitated again, her eyes darting to the doorway. "There is, but it's dangerous. No one's ever dared to try." Before Martha could elaborate, Lily appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes sleepily. "Mama, I'm hungry," she said, her voice soft and resolute. Chris and Emma exchanged a glance, the conversation temporarily cut short. "Go back to the room," Emma said softly. "We'll be there in a minute." Once Lily was gone, Martha leaned in closer. "The Watcher is searching for something. Redemption, maybe. The curse can only be broken if it hears a genuine song of remorse. But no one's willing to risk singing. The moment you make a sound, it'll come for you." Later that day, Emma found herself drawn to the inn's small library, a dusty room tucked behind the main dining area. The air smelled of old paper and wood polish, and the shelves were crammed with books, many of them untouched for decades. Something about the room felt different. She sifted through a stack of journals near the back, her fingers brushing against one that seemed out of place. Its leather cover was cracked with age, the edges frayed, but when she opened it, her breath caught. The journal belonged to a woman named Eleanor, a former resident of Stillhaven. The entries were short but vivid, chronicling the events leading up to the curse's first appearance. December 24th, 1923. She came to our door tonight, her voice like a ghost's melody. My husband laughed at her, called her a banshee. I tried to stop him. I should have tried harder. December 25th, 1923. We found her body this morning. The others said it was her fault for wandering into the storm, but I heard her voice last night, even after she was gone. It sounded angry. December 24th, 1924. She's back. We thought it was the wind at first, but the hum. It's her. I heard her outside the window, and when my husband sneezed, she turned. The entry ended abruptly. The ink smeared as though the writer's hand had been dragged away mid-sentence. Emma clutched the journal tightly, her heart pounding. She scanned the remaining pages, but found only one final note, scrawled hastily in the margins. If we had only sung with her. When Emma returned to their room, Chris was pacing near the fireplace, his jaw tight with frustration. So we're stuck here with some vengeful ghost that wants to kill us if we sneeze too loud. Emma held up the journal. It's not just about silence. It's about remorse. The curse can be broken, but someone has to show her what she never got. A voice that doesn't mock her. Chris stared at her, incredulous. And you think that's a good idea? You saw what happened last night. It'll kill us the moment we open our mouths. Emma didn't respond immediately. She glanced at Lily, who was coloring quietly in the corner, blissfully unaware of the danger they were in. What choice do we have? She said finally. If we don't try, we're trapped. If we make one mistake, we're dead. And I'm not letting that thing take our daughter. Chris didn't argue. He couldn't. The weight of the decision hung between them like the cold silence of the cursed town. That night, the family braced themselves for what was to come. Every creak of the inn seemed louder. Every gust of wind outside carried an unnatural edge. Chris and Emma worked silently, spreading blankets across the floor to muffle any sounds, and wrapping Lily in layers to keep her warm and still. The little girl looked up at them with wide, curious eyes, her questions unspoken but understood. "Just stay quiet, sweetheart," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "No matter what happens, stay quiet." Outside, the hum began again. Low and haunting, it slithered through the air like a distant, broken melody. The silent watcher was awake, prowling the streets of Stillhaven. Then, a knock broke the silence. Emma's heart jumped into her throat as Chris cautiously approached the door. Opening it just a crack, he found Martha standing there, her face pale and her breath visible in the icy air. "It's in the square," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "A child. It's hunting him." Chris's stomach churned. He glanced back at Lily, asleep in her bundled cocoon, then at Emma, who was shaking her head. "No," Emma mouthed, her eyes wide with fear. "You can't." But Chris's jaw tightened. "We can't just let it happen," he said quietly, determination in his voice. Before Emma could stop him, he grabbed his coat and crept out into the night, the cold biting at his face. The streets were deathly silent, except for the watcher's hum, which grew louder as Chris neared the square. He stepped carefully, his muffled footsteps blending into the eerie resonance. The hum wasn't just a sound, it was a presence, oppressive and all-encompassing, pressing against his senses like an invisible weight. When Chris reached the square, he froze. His talons descended to the wood floor. The silent watcher stood near the base of the towering Christmas tree, its tattered robes swirling in an unseen wind. Its hollow eyes glowed faintly, casting an otherworldly light across the icy ground. And there, just feet away, was the child. The boy couldn't have been older than 10. He was curled up in the snow, sobbing quietly, his breath misting in the freezing air. The watcher loomed over him, tilting its head unnaturally, as if savoring the sound of the child's fear. Chris's chest tightened. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he forced himself to stay. He reached down, his hand brushing against a fist-sized rock buried in the snow. Picking it up, he took aim, his heart pounding. The rock flew through the air and struck a lamppost with a sharp clang. The watcher's head snapped toward the noise. Its glowing eyes locked onto Chris, and the hum surged, louder and more discordant, like a scream trapped in an endless loop. Chris stood frozen for a moment, staring into the creature's empty gaze, before forcing his legs to move. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice hoarse. "Over here!" The watcher glided toward him with horrifying speed, its robes billowing as it closed the distance. Chris turned and ran, his breath ragged, and his boots slipping on the icy ground. The hum was deafening now, vibrating in his chest, drowning out his thoughts. He darted into an alley, pressing its back against the wall as the watcher passed by, its head swiveling unnaturally as it searched for him. Chris held his breath, his pulse thundering in his ears. The watcher hesitated, then moved on, its hum fading slightly as it continued its hunt. Chris exhaled shakily and peeked around the corner. The boy was gone, likely pulled to safety by Martha or one of the villagers. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. The watcher stopped suddenly, turning its head toward the inn. Toward his family? "No," Chris whispered. Without thinking, he stepped out of the shadows. "Over here!" he shouted again, his voice cutting through the icy night. "What?" The watcher turned back toward him, its robes flaring as it rushed forward. Chris ran, leading it away from the square, away from the inn. His mind raced as he struggled to come up with a plan, but the creature was relentless, closing the gap with every passing second. Back at the inn, Emma sat rigid by the fire, her ears straining to pick up any sound beyond the thick walls. Lily lay wrapped in blankets, her breathing soft and steady. But Emma couldn't relax. The oppressive silence outside seemed to press inward, filling every corner of the room. Chris was out there, somewhere. She clenched her fists, replaying his parting words in her head. We can't just let it happen. But as much as she admired his courage, fear consumed her. The silent watcher was unstoppable, relentless. How could anyone face it and survive? The hum outside grew louder, deeper, vibrating through the walls. Emma's heart pounded. She reached instinctively for Lily, pulling her closer, whispering a desperate promise. We'll be okay. We have to be okay. Then she heard it. A faint sound cut through the hum, steady, deliberate. A melody. Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat. The sound was unmistakable. Chris's voice, humming the first haunting notes of Silent Night. Her heart lurched. He's singing. Oh my God, he's singing! She scrambled to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see the square. There, under the glow of the Christmas tree, Chris stood, his breath misting in the freezing air. The watcher loomed before him, its tattered robes swirling wildly. The creature stopped, its glowing eyes fixed on Chris. For a moment, everything was still. The hum faded, replaced by the soft, trembling melody of his voice. And then, something extraordinary happened. Still, from deep within the watcher, a ghostly echo joined the song. Its sound was distorted, as if coming from the depths of a long-forgotten well, but it carried a strange, mournful beauty. The watcher's robes stilled, and its hollow eyes dimmed. Emma's hands shook as she watched. She turned to Lily, pressing a finger to her lips, before pulling the child to her feet. Together, they stepped outside, their breaths fogging in the icy air. All around them, doors creaked open. The townsfolk emerged one by one, their faces pale and uncertain. Martha was the first to raise her voice, her words quivering as she joined Chris's song. Silent night, holy night. The melody spread like wildfire. Others followed, their voices raw but heartfelt, filling the square with a harmony that cut through the night's chill. The watcher began to flicker, its form unraveled, tendrils of shadow peeling away like mist caught in the morning sun. The glow in its eyes softened, no longer menacing, but grateful. Chris kept singing, his voice unwavering. The watcher stretched one final time, its robes billowing as if carried by an unseen wind. Then, with a faint whisper, that sounded almost like a sigh of relief. It dissolved into the air. The Hume was gone. As the final note of the song hung in the air, the townsfolk stood in stunned silence. Emma rushed to Chris, throwing her arms around him as tears streamed down her face. "You did it," she whispered, her voice breaking. Lily tugged on her father's coat, her small voice carrying a hint of wonder. "Is it really gone?" Chris knelt down, brushing a tear from her cheek. "It's gone," he said softly. "For good." The town square, once shadowed by fear, seemed brighter now. The frost sparkled in the starlight, and the towering Christmas tree glowed warmly. One by one, the villagers began to cheer, their relief spilling out in laughter and tears. That night, for the first time in a century, Stillhaven was free. The next morning, the town gathered in the square, their voices no longer hushed but filled with joy. Martha embraced Chris and Emma, tears streaming down her face. Stillhaven was free at last. Yet every Christmas Eve, as the first snow fell, the town sang, a tribute to the price of silence and the power of redemption, the story of desperation.
Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe for more. See you next time.